Disclaimer: the content on this YouTube channel includes true stories, some of which are based on real life facts, and some are fiction. We do not claim ownership of any of the stories presented on this channel. We have sourced stories from various online and offline sources, and we have made reasonable efforts to ensure that the stories are accurate and reliable. However, we cannot guarantee the accuracy or completeness of the information presented. The stories presented on this channel are for entertainment purposes only, and any reliance on the stories is strictly at your own risk. We do not accept any responsibility for any loss, injury, or damage that may arise from your use of the stories or any information presented on this channel. Please note that the stories presented on this channel may not be suitable for all audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. Welcome to Demonic Diaries, the YouTube channel where we explore the darkest corners of the human mind. Join me, your host, as I delve into the pages of terrifying tales and haunting stories. From the depths of hell to the darkest depths of the human psyche, we'll be your guide through the most bone-chilling and spine-tingling stories that will keep you up at night. So buckle up and prepare to be scared, because on Demonic Diaries, every story has a dark side. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell to be notified of new videos. Let's get started. Number 1. There's an abandoned house between my town and the town next to me on one of the country roads that connects us. I've been to it before, and even went inside twice with my sister and my best friend. It's an old house that dates back centuries, according to the bank records that I was able to find, and you can just tell by the design. The house is 2 stories with a basement, has lots of furniture and objects strewn about inside, and is far from empty. You can tell that it hasn't been lived in for decades, and whoever had previously owned it, it almost seemed like they just disappeared one day, leaving everything behind. The way I was able to get in before was through the cellar door in the basement, which is broken open and propped up with some big sticks. My first visits were around 2 years ago, and I hadn't gone back at all into that time. Another friend had expressed interest in seeing the house when I told him about my experience, and so, last summer, I told him that I'd take him to it. I never thought it was a dangerous trip, and told him that it's just an interesting place to explore. We parked across the street from the house, in the parking lot of one of the industrial buildings nearby. The road was a rural road, but it was far from unused, and we didn't want to be questioned by anyone. My friend, being braver than me despite my previous visits, led the way across the street and to the front of the house. He asked me a couple questions about it and what stuff I found in there. I told him that the kitchen still had expired food in it, and that the upstairs had a board game set that I ended up bringing home with me. As we walked from the front of the house to the side leading to the back with the cellar, I made note that there was a lot more brush than when I had went last time. I had gone in the spring when I had gone with my sister and best friend, and I never experienced the thick brush that I was now carefully moving through. I made a comment to my friend that there was a lot more foliage than when I had gone before, as we both tried to figure out a path to the cellar. Eventually, we pushed through some branches and found the cellar, broken and propped open, just as I had last seen it. We talked for a second about being nervous, and I really took in the view of the cellar that led into this dark, abandoned house. I remember being really intimidated while looking at the opening, and I made note that some of the sticks propping open the cellar didn't look familiar to me. I didn't state it out loud, however, as I thought it was just my anxiety. My friend and I discussed who should go first, and he said since I'm the expert, I should head in first. I was hesitant, but eventually, after a good 5 minutes of breathing and calming myself down, I started down the few steps of the cellar. It was an awkward entrance, as half the cellar was collapsed and left little room for maneuvering. You had to duck under the part of the cellar door that was still put together, then inch your feet down the steps, and finally turn your body sideways to fit through the small gap into the basement. I took a long time after ducking under the door, since my nerves came back for a second. I made it in fine, and my friend followed very quickly, which I appreciated. We both stood in the corner of the basement now, taking it in. I turned my phone's flashlight on, and he did too. There was a spiderweb in the path to the stairs up to the first floor. I looked around and found some sort of tool to knock the spider web down, and I took the tool and swiped it through the web. After that, I tossed the tool onto the concrete floor. My friend and I talked quietly, I don't remember what about, but afterwards, we fell silent for a second. Above us, I clearly heard footsteps on the boards above our heads. It almost seemed like they were heading to the stairs that led down to the basement. I remember this part the best, as I looked at my friend, and he didn't seem to react to the footsteps I was hearing. I looked at him, suddenly very worried, and before I could even say anything, he said, "We need to go." He turned around and practically jumped up the stairs. I remembered thinking he got out insanely fast. I could see him turn and reach his hand back to help me up. I was a bit slower, but I also quickly stepped up the stairs, and he pulled me through the opening. I landed on my hands and knees after I escaped the cellar, and I immediately stood up facing the weeds. I turned around to my friend, who was crouched, staring down the cellar. I said to him that we should get out of here, and he turned away, and told me to go first through the weeds. I pretty much just ran through the brush, definitely getting caught up by something, but we made it through them and back in front of the house very quickly. My friend kept urging me to go in front of him, and he watched behind us, before switching to flashing his light in the windows on the first floor of the front of the house. I asked him what he was doing and if he was okay. He didn't really answer me at first, so I asked him if he heard the footsteps before we bolted out of the basement. He turned to me and said that he heard them, and that's why he was watching the cellar, to see if anyone was following us out. He continued, saying that after he pulled me up, he turned to guide me away before he let go of my hand, and when he turned back, he saw the bare feet of someone standing at the bottom of the cellar. Because of the cellar's dilapidated structure, he could only see their feet and a part of their legs. At that point, that's when he told me to go through the weeds first. He never saw them come up the cellar stairs or move away from them before he followed me. I didn't believe him at first and thought he was just trying to scare me, but I could tell by the serious tone of his voice and the silent look he gave me after telling me that he wasn't trying to make me laugh or lighten the mood. I still asked if he was lying, and he aggressively said that he wasn't. He told me that I heard the footsteps already, so I knew something had to be in that house. We stood for a second, not really saying anything, before we both then agreed to go back across the street towards our cars. We stood by our cars for a while, watching the house to see if anything or anyone would come out, but nothing appeared. After talking for a bit about how crazy that was, and him reassuring me that he was telling the truth, it started to rain, and we decided to call it a night. I fully believe him, and he's always stood by what he saw. I haven't gone back to that house since, and I like to tell myself that whoever was in that house was just a homeless person finding shelter. I still get shivers to this day, however, thinking about how close that person was to me as I scrambled up the cellar. Number 2. I figured the house in the forest will make a good study for my conspiracy narratives course. Well, I wasn't wrong. We had heard of the house on the 9th lane in the forest. It wasn't an address. It really just meant that it was on the 9th visible street when walking along the forest trail. No one knew how far in. I was about 8 or 9 when it was a household warning. Do not go near the house in the forest. A lot of media reports, newspapers, news channels, local reports were published, updating the small town of the valley of every little new detail. The bare bones was this. First, a family home. The house had 4 occupants. The father and the kids died in an accident, and the mother then turned the house into a care home for any woman or girl who needed a roof over her head. It became quite a common name. The care home ran peacefully, helping girls and women, for about 2 decades before it abruptly stopped. By stopped, I literally mean stopped. Initially, there was a lot of confusion about what had happened, but ultimately the police officials said it was a case of carbon monoxide poisoning that killed all 12 of the residents, including the owner. But then some said it was a fire, food poisoning, an inside job, an electric mishap, but the most popular one was the carbon monoxide poisoning. It did not make sense to most of us in the valley. The papers said all the residents were buried behind the church, but there were only 7 graves there. The owner's is among the ones that are missing. We never got any real answers. But we did not look for any either because it seemed like all the reasonings given were to do with natural or accidental causes. Maybe the owner's grave is with her husband and children beside the home. For better or for worse, the home still stands today. I now attend a university across the country. For one of my courses titled Conspiracy Narratives, we were asked to do a creative project. I decided to do it on the house on the 9th lane in the forest. I gathered all the news articles by searching for the archives online. The local library helped me with the archives of magazines that don't run today, and I spoke to some residents of town close to my parents' age, who were the most cautious of the home in the forest at that time because of their kids. It gave me a good sense of the general idea the normal residents of the valley had about the house. The next task was to visit the house myself, document it, look for some belongings of the last residents, and most importantly, see if I can find something that might go against whatever the media had published then. It did not seem like an easy task. I feared that I will not be able to do it, and my research for this assignment will go down in drain. This was mostly because a lot of the official police reports had stated they'd emptied out the building, showing photos of a huge truck with sealed-off furniture and other things. I wasn't aiming for a huge reveal honestly. It could have been a small thing as the ages of the residents, the name of the house, or some factual inconsistency. Before that, I had to locate the house. All anyone really knew was that it was on the 9th lane in the forest. I left home at about 6 a.m., and it took me 4 hours just to get to the turn of the 9th lane. As I started on the 9th lane, it didn't take long for me to locate the house. It was huge, and its gray and brown structure stood out in the otherwise dull green landscape. But even before I saw it, I could hear some thumps and running footsteps ahead. However, when I finally reached the house, there was no one around it. I slowly approached the house, taking out my camera. It had aged like people do. People become older and weaker. This house had become lighter and weaker. The nameplate of the house read House of Warmth, and below it Layla Joyce. Maybe Layla Joyce was the owner, and she renamed the house to Home of Warmth when she turned it into a care home. The worn gates were open, and the front yard of the home was a part of the forest save for the tall stone boundaries of the home. It surprised me to see that the home was left all alone and not turned into a capitalistic venture. Surely someone must have tried. I stood at the gates and took a photo. Right through the middle of the boundary on the right was the dull green forest, and the left was also the forest, except with benches and tea tables. I walked towards the black door with a scorpion carved into it and turned the handle. It was locked. This shocked me. The door itself did not have a built-in lock. It was a latch system, which means it must have been locked from the inside. And that shocked me. I did not think too much of it till I went around the house and realized that this door was the only way one could safely enter and exit. The back door was barricaded by the police for some reason. I spent some time looking at the windows and decided that I will break a small piece of wood from one of them to enter the home. I know I should have been more respectful towards this old house, which was probably the place of death for at least 12 people. But I really did not see any other way to enter the house. Things turned awfully dark once I stepped foot inside the home. I landed with a heavy mini jump, unsettling the thick layer of dust on the floor. By dark I don't simply mean visually dark, which it was, but also everything just seemed heavier than they should be. I was expecting an empty room, with maybe 1 or 2 cabinets left on the walls. But the furniture was still there. All of it. More than all of it. It looked like I landed in a large area room which had a long dining table with chairs on its far left end, and an elegant brown-grey with dust sofa set on the far right. In the middle was an island shelf which today may store some light snacks and books perhaps. The window I had entered from was next to the dining table. It still had plates on it, 8 sets of them, with a big pot in the middle, as if a banquet that had been waiting for more than a decade was in order. I then realized why it was so visually dark. All sources of natural light were boarded with thick plastic sheets. I turned on my high-power flashlight whose brightness blinded me for a second or two. I then properly took in the room I was in. The plates had leftovers. Not fresh, but old-looking bits that indicated that these plates weren't fresh, they had been eaten off of. The kitchen, on the direct opposite side to where I stood, had dozens of baby blue cabinets. All of them open, and all of them full of jars and boxes. A little cloth hung from one of their handles, as if to wipe one's hands as one was working in the kitchen. The dining table had 8 chairs, only 3 of them properly tucked into the table. The rest 5 chairs stood in a disorganized way as if someone stood up from them, and never bothered to tuck them in again. The one chair at the head of the table was the farthest away from the dining table. I realized that I had been standing in the same place where I landed from the window. I looked up at the window, the small piece of wood in my hand. There's no way that window is going to open again, I realized. I had jammed it by letting it fall after I pushed it open and broke a piece of its edge. I looked towards the main door and saw that it had indeed been locked from the inside. I was relieved to see a potential way out. I walked towards the kitchen, since its cabinets seemed full of things. As I reached the cabinets, I looked towards the dining table and positioned my camera to click a photo before I disturbed things further. As the camera flash went off, I noticed the chair at the head of the table. The dust on it had been unsettled recently. It looked like a petite human's print. The armrest, backrest, ass print, it was a perfect human's figure that could be made from the unsettled dust. My throat was dry, and I was too scared to gulp saliva and make noise. It suddenly felt like I wasn't alone there. It had barely been 15 minutes since I had stepped inside from that window. I moved closer to the chairs to try and see if that was the case with every chair. It was only the 5 disorganized ones that displayed signs of use in the recent past. I looked at the main front door that was locked from inside. What was the possibility that whoever had unsettled the dust on those chairs was still inside? I halted. I stopped moving completely. And I willed myself to listen to the house. Every small movement of mine caused a little creak. It was an old house. I will definitely hear something if there's anyone besides me in the home. I breathed slowly, listening. The wind, the leaves outside, my breaths, the leaves, the wind, and then, a scrape on the floor. It was unmistakable. It was old wood. And when one drags something on old wood, it makes a very distinct sound. It did not come from anywhere around me though. I went towards the sofa arrangement. In the middle of the 4 sofas was a center table made out of wood and glass. It had small teacups on it, with a line hinting at the liquid that has evaporated since. I felt relieved when the dust seemed thick and even. I wish I could say the same for the sofas. There were 5 seating spots where the dust wasn't as thick where the sofa's cloth pattern emerged. I then found a piece of paper on the single-seater sofa. It said, "I wish this home was enough to care for these little girls and the young women. Who knew this earth's children carried such hatred for some of us? Our husbands, fathers, children were taken away from us by the officers in orange suits. They said it would pay us. They said it was only for a month or 2. They said they'd conduct tests that aren't to be spoken of. They said we would not have to worry about being the outsiders after this. Now that our loved ones aren't returned to us, is it not our right to speak for them, of them, and bring something akin to justice to them? Out of nowhere my children's and husbands' graves appeared on the backyard. Is this the price of wanting security as outsiders?" This was dated 2 years or 2 before their deaths. This had to be written by Layla Joyce, the owner of the home. I quickly put it back on the sofa and clicked a picture. I placed my backpack on the floor and took out the folder where I documented the details of this home in chronological order. In no article, write-up or announcement did it mention anything about men in orange suits. I quickly made the connection to the infirmary lab workers from the white lab right outside the town. They now had normal white coats that one would recognize to be of the medical workers. But before they were big, they used to wear orange jumpers. I called the local library and asked if the house on the 9th lane in the forest had ever been discussed in the same breath as the workers from the infirmary lab. The librarian said he'd never heard of it and that it was an odd connection to make. I did not ask why. I wanted to open more cabinets, drawers, files, books, journals, anything I could find there and read more. What were we missing? I then heard the same dragging on wood sound. This time I located it. It seemed to come from above, but not directly above me. A little farther off perhaps. I looked at the watch and realized that I'd been here for a little over half an hour. I turned to look for the stairs when it happened for the first time. The inside of the home went bright from artificial light source from outside the home, something being shown through the heavy and thick plastics that covered the windows. I went blind for a second, and stiff with fear. Once my eyes started adjusting a little to the brightness, I saw flashes of human-like figures near the dining table. It looked like I was looking through flashing images on a screen and not at a physical reality. A big thump came from the main door. High-pitched screams of women came from the dining table across me. More thumps on the front door. 1, 2, 3, 4. Girl figures ran past me. But so did orange ones from the now open front door. Moving deeper into the house, away from the front door. One stood at the dining table, at the head of it. Ran to the door. Silent gunshots. Screams stopping one by one. Then everything went silent. When it ended, I was on the floor, hugging myself tightly. I kept my eyes wide open throughout to explain away the flashes I saw in my vision. But it really was happening. I tried to remain silent for I don't know how long. I tried to put what I'd seen in words, in phrases. I could not. I could not think of anything apart from the men in orange suits that note mentioned. I searched the web on my phone for the infirmary lab outside the valley, and added the year 2007. There they were. In bright orange jumpers, white shiny borders on pockets, with big white boots. They stood beside big vans in the photos. What had I just seen? I looked at my watch. An hour and a half had passed since I entered the home. Everything was silent again. I left my camera running on the sofa and went past the kitchen, deeper into the home. On the left side of the hallway was a staircase to the first floor. On the right was a big cabinet with expensive-looking cutlery inside the glass doors. The glass was dirty, but the cutlery was clean. I was almost expecting to see a figure in the reflection on the glass. But I did not. I started up on the staircase slowly. Although the wood beneath my feet creaked, it was strong. When I looked down at the dusty stairs, I saw footprints going up. Small ones and bigger ones. Of sock prints and shoe prints. I started up, slow but sped up as I kept seeing the footprints. My heart was beating way too fast, and my pant pockets did not have my emergency anxiety medication. When I reached the top of the stairs, I saw a hallway with 3 doors, presumably to 3 rooms. 2 on the right and 1 on the left. There was a pair of double doors at the end of the hallway, with big vases of artificial leaves on either sides of it. On the left side, apart from the door, there was also a big wooden storage shelf. It wasn't a bookshelf because it had big box-sized drawers. And some small ones. I opened one of the drawers to a small transparent box of what looked like returned letters. The address on all of them was the same. To the infirmary lab. But they were addressed to John Joyce. Was Layla's husband taken to the labs? Was she hoping these letters would reach him? I carefully opened the 4 boxes and looked at all the envelopes, without opening any of them. Most of them were addressed to John Joyce, a couple of them to Natalia Joyce and May Joyce. The ones to Natalia and May all had little blue hearts on them. How long did Layla hope she'd finally get to meet her family again before the graves appeared on her backyard? I put the envelopes back and closed the boxes, holding just one letter addressed to all 3 of them, John, Natalia and May, to read. It was the only one which was unsealed. As soon as I closed the last drawer, the hallway went bright again. This time I let out a scream, ran to the end of the shelf and sat down facing the wall. The flashes started again. I could hear thumps and banging on the front door below. Screams. Thumps. Footsteps, this time approaching me. I felt them run past. First light, then heavy footsteps. Silent gunshots. Right behind me. Silencing screams. Complete silence. The hallway went dark again. I realized I had my eyes closed shut. I slowly opened my eyes and looked over my shoulder. I was alone in the hallway. The exact same sounds, movement, lights, everything was the same, repeated. I opened the drawer, put the unsealed envelope back in the 3rd box as I'd found it, and ran to my camera. It had been knocked over on the sofa. I looked at the dining area once again to see if I'd disturbed anything apart from dust, and that note that I'd picked up. I readjusted the note to the best of my recollection, ran towards the door. It must have taken me a little over 10 minutes to unlatch the door. The longest 10 minutes of my life. It had probably not been touched since a decade at least. I did not want to break it. The woman still lived here. When I finally opened it and stepped out, a light breeze touched my face, and I realized my face was wet with tears. I ran out the front gate and sat on the ground, on dry fallen leaves, looking right at the house. It towered over me. But it did not look unwelcoming. Just sad. It looked sad. I took long breaths. In the distance I could hear machines, trucks, a train whistle, and a flight went over my head with blinking red and green lights. Humanity. I felt so relieved, my breath steadied. I reached for my camera from the bag. I wanted to see what it had recorded when it happened for the second time. I had pointed the camera towards the dining table and the kitchen. The video was 44 minutes long. But after about 32 minutes, it was all just static. Not a black screen, just a lot of disturbances, static noises, distortions, and then finally a black screen near the end of the video. I watched the video again and again. Then it happened again. Through the windows, I could see the insides of the house light up. Thumps, the front door moving with each thump. Distant screams. Thumps. Bullets slicing the air. Silence. The house was reliving its end again and again. The women were reliving their ends again and again. Layla Joyce was reliving her last attempt at saving those girls and women again and again. The house of warmth was on a time loop. I sat there in silence, in tears, till the next time it happened. I watched it with steady breath. I listened to their last efforts. The sky was starting to get dark, and the air had grown cold. The light on the front porch turned on. These 5 girls and women, along with Layla Joyce, did not have a grave because they are living and dying every day, over and over again. I stood up and turned my back to the home. Maybe I will return if I ever find a way to comfort the residents of the home. Do they even know they're on a time loop, only living their last few moments? Will it do any good to help them, to tell them? Will they do something different if they knew? I ended up not writing about the house on the 9th lane in the forest for my conspiracy narratives assignment. However, I am writing this, hoping it develops into more, hoping it reaches those who do not know of it, to tell the world of the names who lived in that home on the 9th lane. Layla Joyce, John Joyce, Natalia Joyce, May Joyce, Celia, Abby, Marianne, Rupa, R. And a few more. My search continues. Number 3. Hi everybody. So here's my story, for context. I live away from home for school while my sister lives at home with our parents. Also, both our rooms face the street and are right next to each other. Also, I have a full-length mirror in my room opposite the window, so if I looked in the mirror I'd see what was in the window. So around Thanksgiving of 2021, I had just gotten home from school and was relishing my ability to stay up late, and so was my sister. After our parents went to sleep I was just laying on my bed, watching YouTube. I had my window blinds open, and for some reason, I felt the urge to look up, so I look in the mirror. Outside someone pops up from below the window and bangs on my window super loud 3 times, then sprints away. I am shaking, on the verge of tears. I run to my sister's room and explain what has happened. She is shaken up, but we chalked it up to a dumb teenager. Just a few nights later at midnight, I see a text from my sister. Did you hear that? There was somebody in the window. I felt that same fear. I take my headphones off and begin to get up when I hear 5 super loud bangs come from my sister's room. I run over and she looks really shaken. She says he just ran to the side of the house, the wall that's right next to my bed, and he banged on my wall. Right, where my head is. We both were frozen with fear. We made theories on who it was, but neither of us was the type to have enemies. There were no teenagers on our street. None of this made sense. Sometimes I feel that same chill in the air, and sometimes I think I hear banging. The fear of seeing a face in the window isn't as rare as many would hope. So I'm praying I never meet this boy ever again. We hope you enjoyed these tales of horror and the macabre. Remember, there's always more to explore in the shadows. If you want to stay up to date on our latest videos, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.